Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are so excited that everyone is here joining us today. As you get settled, go ahead and read our message here. We are going to get started in just a minute or two, let some people trickle in, but we would love for you to share with us your name, your role, and where you are joining us from in the chat box. I see some more people are trickling in. So you'll see in the chat box, people are sharing their names, their role, and where they're joining us from. It's always fun to kind of give it a scroll through there and see where everyone's coming from. So if you're here for a minute, go ahead and do that too. See if you have any connections with anyone else that's here. And as I mentioned, we're just letting everyone kind of get settled and then we will begin. Thank you everyone for sharing. If you're just getting here, go ahead and drop your name, your location, and your role in the chat and read what other people are saying to see if you have any connections with them. We'll give it just under 1 more minute to get started. All right, so you are here today with us for our third webinar in our series, Leveraging Interaction for Optimal Learning. So thank you so much for joining us today. For me, it is the evening. I live in Washington, D.C. I actually see I have some neighbors here in the chat. My name is Alyssa Bruner. I've taught grades 1, 2, and 5, but I currently work full-time for the Center for Responsive Schools as a curriculum and instructional designer focusing on elementary school. And I am so excited to share with you what is arguably my favorite responsive classroom practice, interactive learning structures, this evening. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Amber, who will introduce herself.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Amber Searles. I also work full-time for the Center for Responsive Schools, and my focus is middle school, and I too am excited about interactive learning structure. So this webinar should be a very informational webinar for you all, and I hope that Alyssa and I can give you some things to take back to your classroom. But before we dip into, and I'm from South Carolina. I forgot to mention that. I'm from South Carolina. I'm joining you from South Carolina. So while we're in the webinar, here are a few tips. If you notice that there is a lag in your computer, close the programs and browsers to maximize your bandwidth. And you can also exit and re-enter this webinar. We also have the Q&A feature for questions about logistics or just specific questions that you have for the panelists, for Alyssa and I. And we will also be using the chat quite frequently tonight. So the chat feature is used to make positive comments and connections with your colleagues. And this will be recorded. So if you have to skip out early, or if a colleague did not make it to the webinar tonight and they signed up for the series, they will get a recording. So now that we've done some housekeeping, so let's focus on the learning goals. Take a minute to look at the learning goals for leveraging interaction for optimal learning. As you review these learning goals, select a goal that you would like to focus on. All right. So now that you've had the opportunity to review the goals and select one that you would like to focus on, I'm going to pass it back to Alyssa.
Thank you, Amber. So as we're getting started today, I'm going to ask you to take a moment and reflect on yourself as a learner. And we are going to share a poll with you and ask you to submit the response that's closest to how you feel. So the question that you'll see on your screen in just a second is, or the prompt rather, is, as a learner, I am most engaged when I am listening to a podcast or a presentation, collaborating with a partner or a group, or watching a video or a documentary. I can't see the poll up on my end, Amber. I'm
I
not sure
see
if you
it on
started
my
it.
end, Alyssa. I just launched it. Let me do it again.
I do see a lot of answers coming in the chat.
Oh, sorry, you all. So I need to press to let you all vote. So now you should be able to vote.
So even if you've written in the chat, if you are able to add to the poll that we have, we'll give it a second. It says that it's still not giving them the prompt. Did you hit launch? Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties.
I hit launch. Let me exit out, you guys, and then let me come back in.
It says that they're viewing the results, but they're unable to choose any responses.
All right. We're going to do this. All right. Did it work?
Is no options to choose from. Very strange. Okay. Yeah, we won't spend too much time with that, and I'm sorry about that. So I did see a lot of answers coming in the chat, and I was able to read through them, and I saw that there were multiple responses for each of the prompts. So as a reminder, collaborating with a partner or a group, or watching a video or documentary. So I see that there are people representing each of the groups. It does seem to me that the majority of us said that they prefer collaborating when they're learning, and I would agree for my own self. However, regardless of what you chose and what learning style you are and you feel the most connected to, it's probably likely that there's some level of connection and interaction that you have after you have that experience, that learning experience. So for example, if you chose listening to a podcast or a presentation or watching a video or a documentary, even though you might be doing that activity on your own, there's a good chance that you're sharing with a friend or a family member about that and deepening your understanding or your appreciation for that learning afterwards through your conversation. So that being said, today we're going to be focusing all about the importance of leveraging interaction for optimal learning. There's an author named Vicki Halsey who wrote a book called Brilliance by Design, Creating Learning Experiences that Connect, Inspire, and Engage. And she suggests something called the 70-30 principle in the classroom. And you may have heard of this before. Basically, what this principle entails is that students should only be listening to their teachers 30% of the time, and 70% of the time, they should be interacting, talking, experimenting, doing things hands-on. So it's really crucial for students to have ways to interact with one another and the content that they're learning about productively. And that is how interactive learning structures or responsive classroom practice can really help in your classroom.
And I know some of you are probably wondering, what is interactive learning structure? So interactive learning structures are purposeful activities that give students opportunities to engage with the content in an active, hands-on, and interactive social way. Interactive learning structures can increase interaction around the content that you're teaching. It'll pick the student's interest in the material, and it also maximizes engagement and effort. It also can provide opportunities for students to collaborate through discussing with their peers. And it also can have a variety of uses to check for understanding, to deepen their knowledge around a certain topic. And it also can strengthen the academic skills that are essential for improving the learning, to improve the learning outcomes. So interactive learning structures enable students to work purposefully and collaboratively in pairs or in small groups on a specific goal, assignment, or project.
So now that we've shared with you what interactive learning structures are, we would like to give you some tips on how to best use interactive learning structures. So first and foremost, interactive learning structures do exactly what the name indicates. They provide structure for interaction. Without structure, interaction can become chaotic and unmanageable. So it's very important that there are some ways to provide that structure to the students. And one of those things to consider is to use prompts or sentence starters in order to support your students. So for example, before you ask students to interact with one another, you could ask a question like, what do you notice about each of these phases? Or you could provide a sentence starter like, the character I identify with most is blank. Then when the students are ready to go and talk to one another, they know exactly what it is that they are supposed to talk about when they get there, which keeps it very structured. Another way to ensure success is to provide very clear and explicit directions and to model the steps as needed to ensure clarity. So the more clear and concise you are as the teacher when providing directions, the more likely that the students are going to be able to follow through the first time that you've asked them to do so. Another thing to consider when using interactive learning structures is to plan thoughtfully. Interactive learning structures require thoughtful planning and effective management, like most of what us educators do requires. So it's very important for you as the teacher to think about, what are you trying to get across? What is the content that you want students to learn about? And what is the purpose of their interaction? So for example, if you have a topic that you want students to deeply discuss, then you'd want to choose an interactive learning structure that gives them more time to do so with 1 or 2 partners. If you only have 1 or 2 or 3 partners maximum in a group, then everyone's voices are heard and they're able to talk about that topic at hand more in depth. If you only want them to share 1 quick word or thought or feeling about something that they just learned, larger groups could be a good way to do that. So you really want to consider the purpose and the content that you want them to discuss when planning which interactive learning structure to incorporate. You also want to think about the students in your class when you are picking your just right interactive learning structure. Again, this is something that we know as educators, we're always considering our students and what we know about them. But we want to ask ourselves things like, are the students needing some energy right now? Do they need to get up and moving, or do they need to calm down? That'll determine the type of interactive learning structure that you'll want to plan. If they need energy, you might get them up and walking around or even dancing to find their partner. But if they need something calming, you might do something like a 1-sentence summary, which you will experience later this evening. You'll also want to consider friendship dynamics, social dynamics in your class. Are your students in a place where they can be okay choosing their own partners, or just need some guidance? So think about what that structure will look like and how it would need to look if you as the teacher need to provide those partnerships, as opposed to different structures that can work with you, allowing them to figure it out on their own. The last tip that we have for you when you're planning to use interactive learning structures is to start simple. I like to say we go slow to go fast. That was my motto in my classroom. Start with something simple like a turn and talk, which might be something that you're already familiar with, where you ask a student to turn and talk to the student next to them about a topic or a question or a sentence stem that you have posed. You could do something else where you just go around the circle and every student says one thing in response to the closing or the reflection of a lesson. Starting simple like that and working your way up towards more advanced interactive learning structures can really scaffold that for yourself and for your students, give you the opportunity to practice giving those clear and explicit directions, and give your students the opportunity to practice engaging with one another in this different way.
So now, Alyssa, she has given you things that you should consider as you are thinking about including interactive learning structures in your classroom and implementing them with your students. And we're going to give you a few examples of interactive learning structures that we use from and also recorded in actual classrooms. The first one we're going to talk about is maitre d'. And the second interactive learning structure we're going to talk about is mix and mingle to the music. But before you watch the video, you will learn how to actually implement these two interactive learning structures. The first of which is called maitre d', as you see on the screen. With maitre d', first you want to ask students the question. So pose the question to the students. Once you have posed the question to the students, you're going to call out a table grouping, whether it's table for 3, table for 2, table for 4. After you call out the table grouping, the students will form the groups of that particular number and respond to the question that you pose to the entire group. You want to give about a 15-second warning and then signal for your students to wrap up their conversation during each round. And repeat as time allows, changing the tables with each round. Table for 3, table for 5. You can have students respond to the same question or topic with the new groups, or you can also pose a different question. To extend the learning and to bring students together as a whole group and you might want to ask a few volunteers to share key highlights from their conversations or something that they heard interesting that their peer mentioned. So right now, we're going to watch a video clip. And I would like for you all to pay attention to how the teacher uses the interactive learning structure to support their students' optimal learning.
We are going to, as some of you have already guessed, the maitre d'. We already are familiar with this. Remember when I say party of, if I say party of 2, you get together with that one person. Party of 3, then you get together with 3 people, 4 people, and so forth. Remember, you cannot work with the same people twice. The objective is to work with different students and get different perspectives. If you work with the same people every time, you get kind of the same perspective every time. What is the difference between a friend and a classmate? Party of 2. We are going to
So it looks like some participants are already familiar with Maitre D. It's a fan favorite for sure. And it seems a little complicated, but it really is just as simple as asking the partnerships to grow and change and giving them those opportunities to talk to one another. So that's one great learning structure, interactive learning structure that you can take to your classroom tomorrow if you do not have a snow day like some of us might. Another one that you could do is called mix and mingle to the music. And with this one, you'll start by posing the topic or the question that you want students to discuss. Then you're going to play music for about 30 seconds or so as students walk around the classroom and mingle, maybe even dance if you can model what that looks like respectfully. And when the music stops, you have students pair up with somebody near them to become a partnership. And then they discuss that question that you offered in the beginning. And then you can repeat this for several rounds. So two things to consider. One is that you may not always have music on hand. Although it's called mix and mingle to the music, you can easily do this without music, just using a chime or another signal to indicate that it's time to stop mingling. And you can also, at the end of either of these structures, provide time for a full group reflection. So in this group, you might do 2 or 3 different mix and mingles with the music, with 2 or 3 different partnerships. And then at the end, you might ask somebody, share out what was a very interesting thing that you just heard. So you will now have the opportunity to see this interactive learning structure, mix and mingle to the music, in action in a classroom as well.
Right.
All right. So we're going to do a mix and mingle. You're going to find someone that is not in your group, and you're going to share the strategy that you used to come up with the solution. Who can repeat the instructions you're going to do once you stand and move? What are you going to do? Bailey.
So we're gonna not choose. We're going to go to the garden, and not at our group, but somewhere. Not at our group, but somewhere else at our group, and share our strategy.
Yes. So you are going to stand, find another partner, someone that's not in your group, and you're going to share your strategy. Okay? Give me a nonverbal if you understand what you're going to do once you stand. So when you hear the music too, you're going to start.
All right. So we just observed 2 interactive learning structures. We had Maitre D, and some of you all were familiar and are familiar with Maitre D, and another one, mix and mingle to the music. So right now we are going to do a waterfall activity, and this will be used in the chat box. We will be using the chat box. I would like for you all to respond to the following prompt that I give in the chat box, but try not to hit enter until I explicitly tell you to do so. I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to be hard, but you can do it. Then you will see a waterfall of responses coming in, and I'll tell you what we're going to do with those responses. All right. So again, I'm going to ask a question. You respond. Do not hit enter until we give you that signal. The prompt is, one thing I noticed that the teachers did in the videos to support optimal engagement was. Type in your answer without pressing enter. I'll say it one more time for those of you that are continuing to think about it. One thing I noticed that the teachers did in the videos to support optimal engagement was. I'll give you a minute. Give a few more seconds. I'm anxious just like you all. All right, hit enter. Hit enter. The waterfall. The waterfall. The waterfall. Oh, Alyssa, we have some great reflections coming in. Precise instruction. The teachers were very clear as to what they wanted the students to do and discuss.
So take a second, and as these are coming in, thank you all so much for participating. As the answers are coming in, take a second and read them. See if there's things that you also noticed, if you have any connections. The great thing about waterfall is it's a waterfall. It's very quick, but it can be tricky to catch everything. So go ahead and give yourself a second to kind of peek through that, and we'll move on in just a moment. Thank you again, everyone, for your responses, noticing a lot of great things that these teachers and students both did. That'll really help when you're ready to implement them yourselves. Let's go ahead and share the next slide and get them ready for their next activity.
All right.
So
All right, Alyssa, let's see. All right.
All right, so now that you've had the chance to learn about these interactive learning structures and what they are, we gave you some tips on how to use them, and we gave you 2 interactive learning structures to talk through the steps and see in a real classroom. We want you to take a few more minutes to read about interactive learning structures. So in just a second, I am going to drop an article link in the chat, and it is all about interactive learning structures. As you're reading it, I want you to think about, or after you're reading it rather, to synthesize your understanding of the article. Think about one sentence that summarizes everything that you've learned. So if you had to put it in a 1-sentence summary, what would you share about it? And then you'll be ready to share by posting it in the chat box. Sorry, my dog is barking very loudly. I don't know if you can hear that. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat right now. We're going to start this 5-minute timer. During that time, Amber and I will have our cameras off, but we will be available via the Q&A feature. So if you have anything that pops up, feel free to reach out. And if you finish reading our article sooner, send us your 1 sentence. We'll get a few tips of other things to see on the website once we get there. So the link is now in the chat. Amber will go ahead and start that 5-minute timer for us. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them into the Q&A, and we'll see you in 5 minutes with your 1-sentence summary ready to share. I'm seeing some one-sentence summaries coming in. Make sure that you're sending those to everyone instead of just hosts and panelists so everyone can learn from your knowledge gained.
If you haven't done so already, place your one sentence summary in the chat box. And if you have, as others are coming in, check out and read some of your colleagues' responses, what they got out of the article. If you don't have yours yet, it's all right. You have a few more seconds. All right. All right, you all. Again, you can still put them in the chat box if you haven't. But what we ultimately want you all to see is, even though we are in a webinar environment with limited capabilities to allow you all to interact with one another, there was an opportunity for you all to interact with your learning using the one sentence summary activity. This provided an example of a way to facilitate interaction with the content at hand or optimal learning. And this will also work with your students. If you were to do this with your students, I would put them in small groups, have them read an article, and each group come up with one sentence collectively, or each partnership shares a sentence of what they got out of the reading. So electronically, in person, it can be done.
Great. So you have learned a few different interactive learning structures so far that we've talked about. We talked about maitre d', we talked about mix and mingle to the music. You experienced a virtual waterfall, and then you just experienced a one sentence summary. Now, since we're talking all about optimal learning through engagement, we want to give you the chance to ask any of those burning questions that you may have. So reminder that there is a separate Q&A feature from the chat box. So if you have asked a question in the chat box, there's a chance that it kind of got lost along the way. So we would love for you to share with us via the chat or via the Q&A feature so that we can make sure that we answer that question. For now, we have one to get us started, and hopefully we'll get a few more in. Ask us any questions you have about implementing interactive learning structures. But I'll pose this question to you, Amber. People are wanting more interactive learning structures. So if you could please provide us an example of a go-to interactive learning structure in middle school, and then afterwards I'll give one more for elementary school.
Absolutely. Oh my God, do I have to just give just one? I'll choose my top one. And the top one is find someone who. And this is a lower risk interactive learning structure. For example, if you tell your students to find someone that has on the same colored shirt as you, they would partner up with someone with the same colored shirt, introduce themselves, and discuss the prompt or the question or the topic that you presented. And this was my go-to because students like for you to notice what they have on, or if they're twinning with anyone. So this one is a great, fun, low risk interactive learning structure to use in partnerships. All right, Alyssa, I'm closing my mouth because I can do more than one. So I'll let you share your go-to.
Thank you, Amber. So one that I find really great for all learners, and like I said, I taught first grade, second grade, and fifth grade. I use this across the board. It's called Four Corners. And you could use it, you just designate four corners of the room as four different options. And then you ask students to pick an option. And once they're there, they find a partner or partners to talk about the topic that you've asked. So the corners could relate to academics. For example, you could ask them which part of the country are they most interested in visiting, and do north, south, east, and west to reinforce directions. Or you could have it just be their favorite colors and have them labeled for younger learners with the color itself, so they don't even need to read in order to do this. And then once they're there, you can ask them about any type of content area that you wish. The fun thing about interactive learning structures, we're talking tonight all about academic engagement and optimal learning, but you can practice them in times like morning meeting or responsive advisory meeting with fun topics so that they're used to them, so that when you introduce those higher risk academics, they're really ready for it. So you could also, if you're feeling a little nervous about diving right into math equations with an interactive learning structure, you could consider how you can start off going slow to go fast by using it in a less pressured setting like that. So that one I just described is called Four Corners. And you label each corner and have them choose which one speaks to them, and they go there and find a partner that way.
All right. Well, if you want to hear another, because you know I love interactive learning structures. Again, if you have other questions, please let us know. We see them coming in. Let's see.
So there's a question about what do you mean by low risk? And I would love to speak to this a little bit. So when we ask students to share in response to a question that has a right or wrong answer, there's a certain level of risk to that. We're asking them to expose themselves and their knowledge. So when we're saying that something is lower risk, it might mean that they're only asked to communicate to one other student. So that risk is lower, because if they say what's considered what they don't think is right, they're only sharing with one other student as opposed to the whole class. We can also think about this low risk like in a social setting. If we're asking them to share something like their favorite color, that's fairly low risk. Whereas later in the year, you might ask them to share about their greatest accomplishment. That just feels like a riskier topic for them to share in front of each other. So this low risk to high risk, we think about in terms of their academic capabilities, the audience that they're communicating with, and just how they're feeling in the class. And as we build that community and build that structure to allow them to feel safe, then they'll take those academic risks in larger settings more frequently, because they know that they'll have a soft landing pad if something doesn't go exactly according to plan. So thank you so much for sharing that asking that great question.
And I see another question that says, are there any resources or more resources specifically to middle school? Yes. And we will share that towards the end of this webinar, but I'll go ahead and tell you, it is middle school motivators, and it has over 50 interactive learning structures. You can choose a partnership, or if you want your students to be in small groups, all the ideas and thinking and to make it easier for you all is in the books. And we also have downloadables on our website. If there are any interactive learning structures that need to have reflections or some type of paper or resource that goes with it.
So we've got another question in the chat box about, are interactive learning structures only used for small groups, or are there ways to share the discussion with the whole class? There are definitely both. Some of those resources Amber just talked about and we'll share at the end of this webinar have so many ideas, but one more that comes to mind, and I don't mean to inundate with a billion ideas, But there's one called a snowball activity where everyone writes on a piece of paper and then they crumple it up and throw it into the center and then take turns picking up one that's probably not their own and reading it to share their, it's like a reflection or a big takeaway from the day. They share somebody else's, but they use their voice to do so. And that lets everyone hear however many students in the class responded to the prompt. It lets them hear that many answers. So there definitely are interactive learning structures that are meant for small groups or even partnerships. There are larger groups like the snowball activity that I just shared, the snowball interactive learning structure that allow for that full group experience. And the resources that we'll provide you with, I'm going to do my best to not give many more examples tonight. We're just going to answer a couple more questions. We really want you to walk away feeling really empowered and motivated and not overwhelmed. So we'll try to stop giving you any more ideas. However, those are some examples, or that is an example of how it could be used with the whole class. There's another one, Amber, I was hoping you could answer. What do you do if a student doesn't share in a group? If they're not willing to share to the whole group?
Well, of course, we don't want to put our students on the spot. And going back to what Alyssa just said, and the whole thing about responsive classroom, this is just one piece of building that positive community. But it's very important, whether it is elementary or middle school, that you give your students space where they feel confident in talking with their peers. So you, just as Alyssa stated, start with a morning meeting or a responsive advisory meeting so that they will get to know each other, because ultimately, often students don't normally talk to other students that they don't really communicate with on an everyday basis or have the opportunity to communicate with. So going again, you want to start small and work your way bigger. Remember, the interactive learning structure is just one of the key practices, but there are other things that you do to support how those practices are implemented. And also, you want to give very explicit instructions to your students so that they know what to do, how to do, and when to do. And I see one that says, how do you utilize interactive learning when dealing with more difficult children that can derail the activity? We only went over this just a little bit tonight, but explicitly giving instructions. So often students may derail or do other things when they're not clear with the instructions. So we want to make sure that we are clear with the instructions. And also, if a student is derailing, again, this interactive learning structure is just only one piece of the responsive classroom approach. Redirecting teacher language would be a good way to redirect that student or those students. Or you can also use reminding language, but that's in another webinar. So yes. Do you see?
I was going to say something similar, but also wanted to remind everyone of the importance of knowing your students and planning thoughtfully, as we talked about earlier. If you know that some students might have a difficult time, then you might think about pairing them intentionally using a type of interactive learning structure where you can create those partnerships. Again, the resources we offer at the end of this webinar will have so many ideas. Our website has tons of ideas for you as well. But if you know that a student will have a hard time in a larger group, intentionally planning for smaller interaction and pairing them with somebody that they're comfortable with or who will push them in a positive way can be a really impactful way to deal with those behaviors. We're going to do one more waterfall activity, and then we're going to share with you those resources. It sounds like there's so much, or it looks like there's so much great interest growing from what we've shared with you today. about so many of these practices and about the responsive classroom approach as well. So please stay tuned until the end when we can give you that information about how you can learn more, because it is really a whole approach and all of these components work hand in hand. So the questions you're asking are exactly the right questions and we have the answers, just not in this 1 hour webinar setting. So we'll point you in the right direction for sure. The final waterfall activity that I'll ask you is in the chat box. You know how this goes. I'll ask you to hold off on typing until I say enter. What is one word that now comes to mind when you think about how to leverage interaction for optimal learning? I'm placing that in the chat. Remember to not hit enter just yet. We'll see that waterfall effect. What is one word that comes to mind when thinking about how to leverage interaction for optimal learning? It looks like people are ready, so go ahead. Just one word should be quick.
I'm with you guys. I can't wait. I want to see what everyone is sharing.
So something very neat and helpful about a waterfall activity such as this is you can see which words are coming up frequently. That helps us as presenters know what we help to get across to you this evening. So thank you for sharing with us. Take a moment to read through each other's responses and see what resonates with you as well as you're thinking about how to really leverage interaction for optimal learning.
All right, here's the moment that you all have been waiting for. So here are some resources that you can go to, responsive classroom resources that you can go to get more information, more interactive learning structures than Alyssa and I can tell you in this webinar. For elementary, we have the Joyful Classroom, practical ways to engage and challenge elementary students. For middle school, we have middle school motivators. And I'm sorry, I said about 50, but it's 22 interactive learning structures. These are all great learning structures. I've used quite a few in my classroom settings for the young adolescent and middle school. And also we have a quick coaching guide. It is called Lively Learning, and students thrive both socially and academically when they're able to engage in the content and explore in the content. So if you have some time, please visit our bookstore for these resources. And after you leave, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at rcprograms@responsiveclassroom.org. Or if you want to know more about Responsive Classroom and the approach, please visit our website, responsiveclassroom.org. So we have as the evening comes to a close, we want to say, if you thought this webinar was good, we have another one that's coming up in our series. And if you're here today, you will get that reminder. On March 21st of this year, same time, 7 o'clock, we will be introducing the topic of student choice for intrinsic motivation. And we hope to see you there. And again, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you for carving out this time in your evening to join us.
Thank you so much. I see just 2 questions that I'll answer super quick. This will be emailed to you with the email information that you have registered with, so do not worry. The former webinars from the series are on our YouTube channel, on our website. And if you wish to learn more about learning more with us in a 4-day workshop, we would love to see you there. Visit our website for that information as well, or use that email address we gave to get more information. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Bye-bye.